Here are some winning strategies to help your buyer or you win the multiple bid scenario. Regarding price, the first and a very common clause is the escalation clause. This is something you add to your contract in section 1.1, additional terms, conditions. It reads like this: in the event of multiple offers, buyer to pay $1,000 more than any competing offer, not to exceed, for example, $255,000. Proof of highest competing offer due upon contract acceptance. The first thing this does is it protects your buyer from potentially overpaying by a significant amount in a multiple bid scenario. If the house is, if they're asking $250,000, you don't want to bid $270,000, and maybe you could have beat someone by $18,000, $19,000. Unfortunately, you've also shown your hand by sharing the max amount the buyer might be willing to offer. Be careful too that the next highest competing offer may have terms that are just downright terrible, really. For example, the other offer, the second competing offer, may have a home to sell contingency, which really doesn't fly in our market. Or they're asking for $3,000 in seller concessions, they want the swing set, they want the spare fridge in the garage. All those things can make that offer really significantly weaker. So in that escalation clause, you're really just matching up price versus price. The problem is you don't know that other offer's terms, and that could put you in a really poor position. And that's another reason why we ask for proof of next best competing offer. Another strategy you might want to use is called the ridiculous offer. You may be able to convince your client to offer anywhere from 10 to 20% more than the list price. Why? Because sellers are greedy, and they like to imagine they might actually get this ridiculous sales price. So when there's 5 bids and one of them stands out far and above the others, that seller, the greed kicks in. They go, that may not be the best terms for me, but I like the idea of getting an extra $10,000 more than the number 2 or number 3 offer. And in reality, I think it's a pretty safe bet regardless for your client, because an appraiser will likely appraise the home at a figure very close to the original list price. For example, I recently won a multiple bid scenario on a listing that was asking $140,000. My buyer client of mine submitted the bid at $170,000, $30,000 more than asking price. The inspection remedy went fine, but no surprise, the appraisal came back low. It came in at $148,000. And guess what? The seller agreed to lower the purchase price to the appraised value anyway. Because get this, they're still getting over list price. We're through remedy inspection at that point. We're really 2 weeks away from closing by the time we find out the appraisal came in low. Another strategy you could use is that the buyer pays for the seller's title fees or the seller's closing costs. It reads like this: buyer to pay for an Alta homeowner's commitment and policy of title insurance in the amount of the purchase price. This amount not to exceed, let's say, $2,000. So at least you put a cap on it that your seller's not doing something funny, forcing your price up. Now our Board of Realtors, or Columbus Board of Realtors contract, stipulates that the seller pays for title insurance. That's in the normal template for our purchase contract. This clause that we just talked about says that the buyer will bear this cost instead of the seller. This increases the seller's net profit while not affecting the appraisal whatsoever. This is similar to removing a seller-paid home warranty for a buyer or removing closing costs. Regarding financing, the number one thing you could do is to give a cash offer. Just be aware that our Columbus Board of Realtors contract does not reference any kind of appraisal contingency whatsoever. After that, the next best thing you could do is to waive the appraisal entirely. It reads like this: buyer waives section 3.2D appraisal contingency of this purchase contract. Buyer and buyer's lender have a right to order an appraisal, but buyer agrees to bring additional funds to cover any difference between appraised value and purchase contract price. So, for example, I had a buyer client in Upper Arlington. We had a multiple bid situation over asking price when we used this clause. And we did win the bid, and in fact, we beat out another cash offer. We waived the appraisal. We said we'd go this much higher. We used an escalation clause paired with this, waiving the appraisal. Ultimately, I think we were about $20,000 something over list price. Appraisal came in low. my buyer had to bring an extra $14,500 to cover the gap between the appraised value and the purchase contract price. That was a painful conversation for him and his wife, but we ended up getting the house. Another way to tweak that appraisal clause is this. I'm going to call it the limited gap coverage on low appraisal. It says, in the event the appraised value does not meet or exceed the purchase price, buyer agrees to bring an additional X number of dollars, let's say $3,000, out of pocket to meet the purchase price, not to exceed the agreed upon purchase price. So there are a few buyers who can waive the appraisal contingency outright, but this clause is kind of the next best thing for the right buyer. Moderate risk. Should your buyer's loan be denied because of a lack of funds, I guarantee the seller will not be so pleased with you. No saying how the seller might pursue the buyer's earnest money, if it's even part of the contract, and or more. Another way to do it, and this is a realtor or a real estate agent or a real estate broker in my case, getting involved in the transaction and manipulating numbers, is limited agent contribution gap coverage on low appraisal. It says, in the event the appraised value does not meet or exceed the purchase contract price, sounds familiar, the buyer's agent, Dalton Summers of Link Real Estate Group, to offer $1,000 of the 3% co-op commission per the MLS to the seller as an incentive. This total amount not to exceed the agreed upon purchase contract price. What that means is this. I'm using my 3% buyer agent commission, and I'm going to kick in to the contract or reduce my commission, which I as a broker can do, or an agent with the broker's authorization can do, to help kind of cover that gap. And let's say there's a $10,000 gap. Maybe I can contribute a few $1,000s of my commission to close that a little bit. The whole goal being here that I'd rather lose a few dollars of my commission versus continuing the endless showings, failed bids. And it's really, there's no better way to show your buyer that you want to win. I want to help you win, Mr. Buyer client. I'm putting more or less my theoretical money on the table. I'm putting it on the line for you to help get this house. An easy one. I think this should happen for every single buyer you work with. It's semantics here a little bit, but a fully underwritten pre-approval, highly, highly, highly recommended. Every buyer who you are showing homes to needs a fully underwritten pre-approval letter. This means that this buyer's gone through all the underwriting. They're good to go, pending strictly an appraisal. So that's a good way that amongst, let's say, 7 offers, you stand out. So yeah, you want to do an appraisal immediately upon contract acceptance? Then yeah, we're good to go. We can close in 10 days if you want, provided title's ready, the seller's ready, etc. Pending, now there are no major changes in your financial situation either. Many lenders are really happy to help do this ahead of time. Presents a little bit of risk and time and energy from them, but to have that fully underwritten pre-approval, really spectacular thing to kind of go into war with for these multiple bid scenarios. Appraisal to be ordered within 3 business days of contract acceptance. All things being equal between multiple offers, I think this contingency will satisfy the seller, really the seller's urge to know, did their home appraise, and if so, how much? And they just want to know that a lot sooner rather than the traditional timeline of, okay, let's order it 2 weeks in the contract. And now 3 weeks in the contract, you know that your appraisal came in $20,000 low and the deal's dead, all for nothing. Yes, this is a bit of a risk to your buyer. They have to front this money, and God forbid your inspection remedy breaks down, but now you've spent $500 on an appraisal they really never needed to get. That's the reason for this timing, that inspection remedy. Then they ask for the appraisal to be ordered. Now, regarding the inspection remedy period, the big one, and I've now only had, I think, 2 owner-occupants do this, or consumers do this, and it's to waive the inspection and remedy period entirely. It says, buyer waives their specified inspection period and agreement to remedy period. Buyers completed their due diligence and is satisfied with the property and its as-is condition. You can also just put 0 days in there when you're saying your specified inspection period, and also 0 days in your agreement to remedy period. High risk. I do not typically recommend this for a consumer, owner-occupant, unless they themselves are an inspector, contractor, professional. They've been through the home, in the attic, in the basement, around the perimeter, or they did an inspection at the time of the showing originally. Another way to incentivize the seller to take your bid is to waive your remedy period. Buyer waives their agreement to remedy period. The specified inspection period of 10 days in this example is for the buyer to conduct inspections and or tests. Within this time period, the buyer will decide to either A, proceed with the purchase as is, or B, terminate this purchase contract and provide a copy of tests, inspections, and reports specifying the conditions that were unsatisfactory. Minimal risk, buyer can still purchase the home or terminate, but you won't get the typical $1,000, maybe $2,000 in repairs that you might otherwise get in kind of the second round of negotiation between inspection and remedy. Another way the seller might take your offer over a stronger offer in terms of price might be that you tweak the remedy clause. In the event that efficient items per the buyer's inspections, tests, are less than $1,000, then the seller should not be responsible for any repairs or credits for the buyer whatsoever. The point you're really trying to convey here is that the buyer's not going to nickel and dime the seller during the inspection remedy period. And that's kind of obvious in the contract already, though. But it also brings up that the obvious question here is, who determines the cost of the theoretical repairs on the inspection report? Who says that it's $1,000? If a contractor can supposedly do these repairs for less than $1,000, I think your buyer client should be hiring that contractor after closing to do them. Ultimately, guys, I hope these strategies help you win the next multiple bid. They're useful in certain specific situations. Some can be effectively used in unison. Here's my CYA. You should always have an attorney review your contract. The CBOR contract calls it out already, but have that attorney review your contract if you're not familiar with it. Have more questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to help.